All right, shalom, everyone. Shalom, and thank you once again for joining the House of Shiloh Ministries. We thank you for taking the time out to go through this very long lesson about now what to do after you learn the truth. This is part 17, and the lesson is sponsored by the House of Shiloh Ministries and presented by yours truly, Brother Andrew Bradley. Like I said, I thank you for, if you've made it through the first 16 pieces, 16 parts, we have gone through quite a bit. And the last session, part 16, we spoke on, that the scriptures were written to Israel and not other people. So we're talking about the relevance of Israel today. And one of the ways we can point that out is to understand the audience of the scriptures, okay, of the New Testament specifically. So we'll go ahead and continue this lesson in part 17 by going to the next slide. And we'll continue this lesson in Ephesians 2 and 8. Again, the scriptures were written to Israel and no other people. For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of Elohim. You know, Christianity will quote this stating salvation is by grace and a gift from Elohim. And they mean that alone, that you don't need anything else. But again, you cannot read one verse and not the preceding verses, right? Or the whole letter, in fact, to the Ephesians. So we never read pieces of a book. We never open up a book and go into the middle of it, read a small paragraph, and say, I know the whole story. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how Christianity teaches us to read the scriptures. So let's examine Ephesians to help us understand, one, that the letter of the Ephesians is in fact not Gentiles, and two, the letter to the Ephesians were actually to Hebrews and no other nation, just like we did in part 16 with the letters to Galatians. Mm-hmm. All right? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to go prior to Ephesians 2 and 8, like we said, because you can't just take 2 and 8 and say, oh, that's it, that's enough. Let's go to previous. Mm-hmm. Ephesians 1, 5 through 6. Having predestinated us unto the adoption of children by YAHUAH HaMashiach to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will, to the praise of the glory of his grace, wherein he has made us accepted in the beloved. There's a lot in these two verses. Mm-hmm. And the problem we have is that the church says, see, I was predestined to believe and be saved through Jesus Christ. That's what they think this is saying. Mm. That's how they explain this verse. But the problem is, English doesn't get the translation right. And that's with purpose, because you got to understand why the church has done this. The way they translate the original text, and the original text was not Greek. Why would Hebrew-speaking people with Hebrew culture write all their letters in Greek? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Unless there might be some argument with Paul's letters, because he spoke to a lot of Greek colonies, and a lot of them were Greek-speaking because they were Hellenistic. Maybe you got an argument with Paul, but you don't have that with the Gospels. You don't have that with Peter's writings. You don't have that with James' writings, and you don't have that with John's writings. But they coincidentally picked the 13 letters of Paul to stand the church on. So we need to focus on Paul's letters. That being said, they do not translate these right to make sure that they're inclusive. But we have to read this according to, one, the language closest to the original translation we can get, which is Greek. We can't get the Hebrew content. I wish we could get the Hebrew content, but I don't have access to it, so I go to the closest thing I can get. And by doing that, in a lot of ways, we can easily prove how the English translations have been messed with and twisted to miseducate and misguide. So let's look at the word, the adoption of children. So within predestinated means it was predetermined. Predetermined or chosen prior to our birth, us, having chose us, or having made plans and determined a certain thing for us. That's how you can say predestination or predestinated, sorry. But let's look at the adoption of children. That's actually one Greek word, but they translated into a phrase, several words, and it's huio. It's hard to say. Huiothesia. Huiothesia. And I use the Greek, the Thayer's Greek lexicon to help us understand this. And it's called, here, the adoption as sons. Now, the Thayer's gets very specific with the definition for us. It says here that the relationship which Yah was pleased to establish between himself and the Israelites in preference to all other nations. So this word had a specific definition related to Israel, the word that Paul chose to use. But you can't get that in English. So now, if I read it only in English, I'm already saying to myself, oh man, because of my faith in Jesus Christ and my belief, I was predestined to be adopted. This is how they get people to believe that anyone can be of Israel, because you can be adopted in by grace and faith, as we spoke on according to Ephesians 2:8. So you see, some may say then the adoption is through Christ, but remember, Christianity didn't even exist during Paul's statement here. There was no Christian religion, none. And though you might find that word Christian 3 times in the New Testament, that's it, just 3 times. I know once in Acts, once by Peter, might be twice in Acts, but it's only 3 times. None of it was ever used by the disciples or other Hebrews, because they didn't call themselves that. So the word or the religion, did not exist. So you can't argue that point. If you know the true history of the church, we already know that church, because we've talked about it many times in our own lessons and studies, that the Christian church did not come into creation until about the 4th century after the death of the Messiah. Now, they had believers, of course, and some of them were being called Christians by non-believers and pagans, but that was not the religion. All right? So we see already here that verses 5 through 6 is pointing to Israel, but you have to read it in the original text, or closest to the original text, not in English. Does anybody have anything to add to this one?
Yes.
Alrighty.
One moment, please.
All right. So if no one has anything to add, or did Minister White, did you have something? I'm sorry, I thought you said you had something.
No, I changed my mind. That's okay.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. If nobody else, let's go ahead and continue to see that Ephesians still is talking about Israel. Ephesians 2:1-2. And you has he quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sin, wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. All you got to do, you don't really need help with these 2 verses. They tell you the audience. These 2 verses especially. So he's talking to a body of believers now. They weren't at first, but they're converts, right? And he's telling them in past tense that you were dead in what trespasses and sins. Keep that in mind. When in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in children of disobedience. How are these children of disobedience? What were they disobeying? That's what we have to understand.
Mm-hmm.
How can you disobey unless you know what is right and what is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
If you were some pagan nation or a nation that was not of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
were you given what was right and what was wrong? No, you were not. So how can you be the children of disobedience? How can this audience truly be a pagan or Gentile non-Israel nation when somehow they're called the children of disobedience?
Mm-hmm.
So, like we said, we must pay attention to the small words, right? We know that now trespasses is what? Purposeful. Well, not necessarily purposeful, but breaking of the law of Yah or disobeying the law, even if it was incidental, it's still considered a trespass.
Mm-hmm.
You also have iniquities, which is purposeful breaking of the law, and you have sins, which is disobeying or breaking the law in general.
Mm-hmm.
That's what trespasses and sins mean. So if he's directing this to a group of people in Ephesians, he can't not be talking to some Greeks, some, Europeans. He couldn't do that. They wouldn't know what he was talking about. It wouldn't even apply to them. Even if they didn't know what he was talking about, it wouldn't apply to them because it was not relevant to them because the laws were not given. One of the arguments is that they say, well, the law was given to some that were not Israel. No. When Israel came out of Egypt, yes, they had strangers who cleaved to them because they were like, I'm going with y'all. Y'all already whooped Egypt, but I don't want to stay in this place. But the law was given to Israel to obey, and the stranger had to obey with them as long as they stayed with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But the law was never given to the stranger as a caretaker or a holder or a teacher of it.
Mm-hmm.
But they had to obey as long as they stayed in the camp of Israel. That's a difference. So here, that doesn't make up any excuse or any reason to blow off what you see here. What you see here is pretty straightforward. He's really talking to Israel. Anybody want to add anything to that?
I'd like to highlight what you just said. You mentioned that as long as the stranger was in the camp of Israel, they were accountable for upholding the laws of Yah, just as Israel was. But if they were to leave the camp and go to another nation, Yah did not expect them or hold them accountable for going to implement those laws somewhere else. They've walked away from it. Not only did they walk away from the law, but they walked away from being in covenant, from Yah having a responsibility over them, him being an overseer over them. So they, when they walk away, they divorce themselves from being protected or overlooked by the Most High. But Israel was given the laws as they were to be the custodians of it. So wherever Israel went, they were expected to carry those laws with them and implement them everywhere they went. He did not expect that of the stranger. So that's another difference that I think you're highlighting in this area right here. Excuse me.
And that's very good, and that's important to understand. And Isaiah points that out as well about the stranger's role, because the stranger who lives among them is how the stranger or the non-Israelite receives their salvation. And I know that's another lesson, but it's important for the stranger or the non-Israelite to understand that obedience to Torah, holding up the covenant, meaning respecting and honoring and believing in the covenant, and keeping the Sabbath are absolutely essential for the stranger.
Mm-hmm.
Without it, they are outside the camp of Israel and thus susceptible to the wrath of Yah, for the judgment of the nations when that time has come. It's very important for those who are not Israel to understand that their salvation is through Israel. It's through Israel, but that's a whole nother lesson.
Can I make one more comment, please?
Yes, ma'am.
You'll also notice when Moshe goes up on the mountain and comes down with the commandments, the 10 commandments, and the other social laws, right? You notice that, and also the blueprint of the pattern of how the tabernacle is to be designed, how it's to be erected. All of those things were put into the hands of Israel only, even though there were strangers among them. You don't read in the scriptures where you find strangers building the tabernacle. You don't find you don't see that. You see that it's given to Israel to do that, and that means Moses, Aaron, and their family. Right? You don't see them going to get some of the Egyptians and some of the other people that followed with them and say, well, would you please help us in this endeavor? It was never given to them on purpose because Yah was making a point that Israel is the custodian of his laws, of his Torah, and they are to dispense it throughout the world. So I just wanted to highlight that again.
That is so true. You don't see it in any of the scriptures where a stranger went into the temple, sacrificed, or, in the temple, did all these things, or even set the temple up.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do any of that. They didn't do any of that.
No. Converts benefited from being in the camp with Israel, but they never became the custodians of the law. They did benefit from it, right?
Correct. And Isaiah says the role is a servitude role, and we're not talking about slavery, but a humility, because they're going to have to humble themselves, bow themselves to Israel because of all that Israel's been through, of course, at the hands of the descendants of the stranger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have to learn from Israel because only Israel can truly teach the will of Yah, the full will of Yah, spiritually and physically.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
And they can teach it from the perspective that it's supposed to be taught. There's some great teachers that are white and other nations in Torah. They know their stuff, but they're always missing something.
True.
And those people will have to humble themselves and do what it says in Isaiah. But they even have to recognize their role. Some of them don't even recognize who they are. It's so twisted right now. So I know we went off course, but it's the truth. It's the truth. So anybody else want to add anything?
I think I'm feeling chatty. One more thing. Another reason why it's difficult for someone outside of Israel to portray Yah's truth the way it should be, because each nation had their own God. So when these laws, when the Torah is given to them, they are not looking at it from a Hebraic perspective. They have inclusionary glasses on. So it's going to become a part of whatever laws, customs, and traditions and religion that their nation is already worshiping. What do you call it? Syncretism. I think that's the word that you used. Mm-hmm. So this is another reason why they cannot. And if that's not the case, then again, it's the glasses of inclusion. This applies to all of us, that means every nation around the world, can be custodians of Yah's truth. So because their perspective is skewed, right, then it's not possible for them to teach this truth undefiled. Okay? Be quiet now.
That is true. And we know that's true because you and I was talking, and we were talking about the time in the wilderness, right?
Mm-hmm.
How the wilderness, the 40 years, was used to purge the sin out of Israel. That the people who crossed over the Jordan were not a people that brought the idols and disobeyed Yah and built the calf and did all that nonsense. All that generation was gone. The generation that was going over was circumcised, so they were in accordance to the covenant, and knew the laws and statutes and commandments before they were even allowed to set foot in the promised land. So they were given their land, the covenant and the laws, to a people who were stripped clean of all the paganism that they picked up in Egypt. So no one could say, well, they were doing this and doing that. No, not when they set foot across that Jordan. Y'all made sure of that. They were nice and clean. Okay. Well, we got some highlighted words here. So let's move to the next slide to take a look at what these highlighted words mean. And the first word we want to look at, we've already talked about this, but just to show you, I'm not just speaking off the top of my head. Trespasses here is paraptoma, and it means, this is the Greek Thayer's, the Thayer's Greek lexicon, a lapse or deviation, but that is unintentional error. So it's an unintentional disobedience. Another another definition of this was a lapse or deviation from truth and uprightness. So if this is a deviation from truth, then we should understand what truth is to a Hebrew. Because again, this is a Hebrew letter. It's a letter written by a Hebrew of Hebrews, I like to call Paul. And according to, and I guarantee you, with Paul's photographic memory of the old original scriptures, he did Psalms 119 and 142 didn't slip by. Thy righteousness is an everlasting life, and thy Torah is the truth. Okay? So to Paul and Hebrew, truth is Torah. So we could see that trespasses is a lapse or deviation, an unintentional error, an unintentional sin, which we have to deal with daily in our lives. That's why grace is wonderful. It gives us the ability to address our unintentional disobedience. Okay, that's what's wonderful about grace. But so now we see that I'm not talking from just off the top of my head. I have proof here. All right. Let's. If anybody have anything with that, we'll continue and we'll define the next word, sin. Nope. All right. So here, sin is hamartia, and it's the Thayer's Greek lexicon, and often a violation of the divine Torah in thought or act. You don't even have to do it. You got to do is just think of it. And, Yahusha speaks of that. If you even lust after a woman in your heart, you've already committed a sin, for example. All right, so we see that the word sin here means the disobedience of Yah's divine Torah. And this supports what 1 John 3 and 4 says, whosoever committed sin transgresseth also Torah. For sin is the transgression of Torah. So when a church person says he fulfilled the law, then why does sin exist? That's one. Why is sin still defined by it? And why you are not allowed to transgress it? And how can you say then that you're saved only by faith and grace when you're not supposed to sin? And even Paul says that, sin no more. After he says in Romans 6:14, about for we are no longer under the law. So he continues and says, but should we continue in sin so that grace may abound? No. But they cannot get past verse 14 and just hold on to that and just blow everything else. Forget the contradictions of the surface contradictions that somehow creates. They want to address it. So just by seeing these last few slides, you see that Ephesians 2:1-2 is definitely talking to those who had the law, the Torah, delivered to them. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next slide and just restate the verse so we can just have a nice understanding about it. All right? Restating of 1 and 2, Ephesians 2:1-2. And you has he quickened, who were dead in unintentional errors and disobedience to Torah, when in times past you walked according to the course of this air, according to the prince of the power of the air. Course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. The spirit of that now worketh in the children of disobedience. And the children of disobedience, like we spoke earlier, how can you be disobedient children if you were never given instruction? How can a people who never had Torah, being of another nation, know what Paul is talking about here? And here's the word for children. Huios. All right? In a wider sense, a descendant of the children of Israel, sons of Abraham.
Ooh.
That's pretty straight. That's the nail on the head and everything else right there. So you can't get this understanding sticking to your English. All right?
Brother Andrew, that last definition where it says in a wider sense, a descendant of the children of Israel, sons of Abraham. Could that include Abraham's other sons? Or it could not, right? Because it says descendants of the children of Israel. Never mind, it cannot.
No.
Okay.
No. And though some will try that, if you were involved in the earlier parts of this lesson, we spoke extensively on the covenant and who the covenant belonged to. And the covenant and Torah go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other because it requires the obedience of Torah to stay compliant with the covenant. So the covenant and Torah are hand in hand. They're not separate. All right. Anybody else?
No.
All right, let's move next slide. So with our understanding, we must conclude this, right? What we read in Ephesians. These verses are speaking of Hebrews who are in Ephesus. We know this because a people cannot be held accountable to Torah unless Torah was given to them, even if it's been generations since they've received it. Does it matter? Minister White, what is the king who went into the temple? Oh no, the priest who went during this king's rule went into the temple and found the scroll, the Torah scroll. And when he brought it to the king, he read it, and the king rent his clothes and said, "Oh boy, we in trouble." What king was that?
I forgot, but I do remember the account, but I forgot the person's name.
Oh, me too. I won't dare say the name because I think it's on the tip of my tongue, but I won't say it. But we'll maybe somebody can look it up for me while the lesson continues.
I'll look it up.
But the story is wonderful because when the temple was in poor shape, very, very poor shape. Stuff was, just imagine when the priest went inside, the place was just ransacked, tore up, nothing's clean. The walls were cracked and in poor condition, everything. And he finds this Torah scroll. And this is a priest. He has not even read it in his lifetime. So that tells you how long it's been. When he read the Torah, this is the reason why I'm bringing it up. People can't say, well, how are they going to be held accountable? This has been decades or hundreds of years. When he read this Torah, this priest and the king was devastated by this. They rent their clothes, demanded a fast, and started praying and correcting their errors, their mistakes, because they realized that they were in trouble with the Most High, even though they were in ignorance of it. It wasn't by ignorance that they got there. It was by choices that preceded them. But they were still going to be held accountable. That's the same situation the Hebrews in Ephesus were. So that's the reason why I brought it up. And to show you that only those who have Torah would be accountable. The Psalmist says it in 147, 19 verse 20, he showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He has not dealt so with any nation. And as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye YAHUAH. Now, most people will say, he judged Sodom and Gomorrah. He judged them based upon their behaviors and interactions, but he didn't judge them according to his Torah. That word judgment is a legal judgment. I want people to understand that. That word points to a legal decision. Thus, this judgment that Psalms is talking about is reference to Israel because they had the law in their own possession. Okay? All right. Everybody following?
Yes, I'd like to give you the scriptural reference of what you were inquiring about, the king.
I knew it. I'm telling you. Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
It's in 2 Kings chapter 22. 2 Kings chapter 22, and the king is King Josiah, right? And if you start reading in verse 9 through verse 11, you will hear it. It says, and Shaphan, the scribe, came to the king, brought the king word again and said, thy servants have gathered the money that was found in the house and have delivered it into the hand of them that do the work, that have the oversight of the house of YAHUAH. And Shaphan, the scribe, showed the king, saying, Hilkiah the priest has delivered me a book. And Shaphan read it before the king. And it came to pass when the king had heard the words of the book of the law that he rent his clothes. That's 2 Kings 22.
It's a wonderful read, and it teaches you that Yah does hold you accountable, even if you're a descendant, because it's your ancestors' sin that put you in the position that you're in to sin, and that you lived according to their sin, and in many ways have reaped badly, and in many ways have reaped, wealth and everything else associated with what we can get from our sin. This is the reason why it just doesn't disappear, because I was born after what my grandfather did or my father did. And there's other stories in the Bible, in the original scriptures, I like to call them, that demonstrate that the sin will fall on the children, fathers, grandfathers, or so on. There's other stories as well. All right. Let's move and talk about some more Ephesians. We got another one here. Ephesians 2, 4 through 5. But Elohim, who is rich in mercy for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in sin, has quickened us together with Mashiach. By grace, ye are saved. So Paul uses we here. And I want people to think about this. Why is he saying we and us? He's including himself with this audience. And we've already proven in the previous verses that these are people who were delivered the Torah in their own history. They just don't know it. Paul uses this we to include because he's in the same situation. And being dead in sins cannot occur unless you have been given Torah. All right? So let's continue reading. There's nothing that no one to add. Let's continue reading to increase our understanding of Paul's letter from verse 11 on the next slide. So we're going to jump up a few verses and go to verse 11.
I want to make one quick comment about what you have highlighted and read, where it says we were dead in sins, right? And then you have a bullet, two bullets down. It says dead in sins cannot occur unless you have been given Torah. So those who are of the children of Israel who refuse to live by Torah, but claim that they have life, that they have eternal life, that they have access to eternal life, really are still dead in their sins, because they do not uphold what Torah is asking them to do. So Yah considers you dead until you are obedient to what it is He has given for us to follow. Excuse me, I just wanted to highlight that. Dead in your sins.
And when we say that, and yes, ma'am, that's 100% true, people will quickly say, well, you can't be saved by the law. And they'll quote Galatians for the deeds. It doesn't say the law. It says for the deeds of the law, no man is justified. Why? Because Paul will tell you, because by the deeds of the law, sin is known. He says because law lets you know what sin is. So if a person is required to do a deed, it demonstrates that he is not righteous. He is not just because he disobeyed. That's why Paul says the deeds don't justify you. But your faith through grace does. And it's important then for us to understand what faith means. And we do not know what it means in the modern sense. We only know, in the Hebraic sense, we only know it by what English says, which says belief in YAHUAH or belief in Jesus Christ. That's a tiny piece of the definition. The true definition, it goes much further than that. Faith is loyalty and steadfastness. To what? To Yah. To what in Yah is Torah, and we can demonstrate that easily because Paul uses it by quoting Habakkuk 2 and 4, where the just shall live by faith. The word for just is Sadiq, or in Greek it will be dikaios, which means righteous, and righteous means, according to those two words, obeying the law or lawful. So he's saying the lawful shall live by faith. So faith and obedience to the law go hand in hand. All right? It goes hand in hand. So, no, you can't say it's just by faith and grace. So now if you know that faith and law and obedience goes hand in hand, you have to understand what grace is. What is grace? If grace comes through Mashiach only, and he's our mediator, then it must have something to do with the act of mediation, giving us that opportunity to get it right through our loyalty and steadfastness to Yah's will. You got to be able to put these pieces together, and you can't depend your whole understanding based upon one letter. You'll mess yourself up messing with Paul like that.
Also, Brother Andrew.
All right, anybody else?
Yes, you just stated that it's that the deeds of the law do not. You are not saved by the deeds of the law. But notice what the scripture did not say. What the scripture did not say is there is no law. So if the law was done away with, why is Paul making the point that your deeds of the law do not save you if the law didn't exist anymore? So that alone lets you know that the law is still relevant. He's letting you know that your deeds, the way you're keeping the law, is not what's saving you. Even though it's a mandate, but the way you keep it is still, there are still errors in it. There's still mistakes and sin in it. That's how come it is not the qualifying piece for salvation. But we are required to keep the law. We are required to keep it.
You have to.
Because he wouldn't be discussing it, saying that your deeds of the law don't save you if the law were done away with. Okay, that's what I wanted to highlight.
I agree with you completely. That's why if the church really wanted to do the right thing, they will seek understanding of how to define Hebraically what deeds are or works. They're the same word. Deeds or works of the law. What does righteous mean according to the Hebrew? What does faith mean according to the Hebrew? And one more. What was the last one? Grace. I'm sorry, grace as well. Grace, faith, deeds or works, righteous.
And in case someone inquires and say, why must we view the scriptures from the Hebraic perspective? And the answer to that is easy also. Your Messiah, our Messiah, is a Hebrew Israelite from the tribe of Judah, or YAHUAH. So he's not a Christian. He's not a Muslim, right? And he's not any of the other religious things that are prevalent today. He is a Hebrew Israelite. And when he taught from his perspective. So it is our job to get on board with him and not him to get on board with our thinking.
That's so true. And let's use a modern, yet humorous example. And I've said this before. Let's say I had a diary, and you all have heard me say this, but let's say it for the audience that will listen. Let's say I had a diary, and in that diary, I went to go see a movie with my brother, and I wrote my experiences in the movie, and I said it with my cultural ebonics, right? Who I am as a black male. I looked at my brother, and I wrote exactly what I said to my brother. I looked at my brother, and I said, "Man, that movie was bad. It was banging." All right. I wrote that in the art in my journal, and 400 years passed. The journal's lost and buried under so much dirt. 400 plus years passed, and some researchers and archaeologists found this book. They don't know who I am. I'm long gone and dead, right? They pick up the journal and they're able to open it up and they read it and say, "This movie was bad. This movie was banging." Man, he didn't like the movie and it must have been really loud. He's reading my journal from his own cultural perspective. And he does not have the ability to understand its true intentions because he's not reading it from a Black American's perspective of that time period because he doesn't know that. So if he did know that, then he would have to understand what I meant culturally by that and read according to the culture to get a fully different perspective of what I wrote. That's how the Bible should be read. Because even Hebraically thinking, you can't say what it is today. You have to think on how Paul would have thought then. Because at the time that Paul was writing this, the only thing he ever lived by was the original scriptures. So you can't base it upon modern Hebraic thinking because the modern Hebrews have all kinds of stuff available to them. You have to think of what Paul would have had available to him. So you even have to take in context the time, the culture, the circumstances Paul was living in. All of that must be taken in context when you read the Bible, especially Paul's letters. So, okay. All right. So, anybody else?
No.
All right. Let's continue to verse 11 now. So Ephesians 2:11 through 12. Wherefore remember that ye, being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands, that at that time ye were without Mashiach, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without Elohim in the world. Honestly, you don't need nothing else. If you don't get Ephesians was not to some weak, random European nation, then I don't know what to say to you. Even if you don't fully understand what you're reading, there's enough in this verse without looking to say something isn't right. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive into this verse. Okay? Let's move to the next slide. So in time past denotes a condition when it comes to the Gentile. In time past, you were Gentiles. So if we go by the modern definition of Gentile, which means non-Hebrew, how can you unbecome what you are then if the word Gentile meant non-Israel? So you're telling me I'm no longer Israel. That's what the church will try to tell you, because it's a spiritual thing, they say. But that's not but the conversation of a spiritual Israel is not being discussed here in Ephesians 2 anyway. So they can't use this particular verse for that. But that is an argument they try to use. But here he's pointing out that in time past you were a nation, not Gentile. And this is part of those translation errors that we talk about quite a bit. And this is a purposeful error. This is not an error, actually. This is a purposeful translation change to cause the scripture to be inclusive. The word Gentile is ethnos, which is our word that we get ethnicity from. Ethnicity is in reference to a nation or group of people of same demographics, culture, language, and so on. So he's telling them really here, wherefore remember that ye being in time past nation or a nation that was in the flesh, living according to sin. That's what he's saying. Who were called uncircumcised, meaning lawless, pretty much. Without covenant, pretty much. That's what they're saying by those who were in the covenant, according to the flesh made by hand. Because Paul also speaks about a spiritual circumcision of the heart, which is part of Scripture. So he's not saying something that's not found in the original text. And then he says that at time, and that at that time you were without Mashiach, of course. This is the reason why you were in extradition. Mashiach wasn't delivered to you yet. Now, let's talk about being aliens, right? Alien is apollatrio. Let me see if I can get that. Apollatrio. Trio. I think I got it. And the Strong's definition is to estrange away, that is to be non-participant. And theirs is to be shut out of one's fellowship and intimacy. All right, so that's a hint, right? That's a hint of what we know that they're talking about. All right, everybody follow. We're going to have to fill the rest of this in to get the whole picture.
Yes.
Okay, let's move to the next slide to talk about. So we talked about aliens. Now we're going to talk about aliens to the what? Commonwealth. Okay, aliens or aliens from the Commonwealth. And what is Commonwealth? It is politia. It is citizenship, concretely a community, a state, theocratic or divine commonwealth. Citizenship, the rights of a citizen. In the American Heritage Dictionary, the people of a nation or state, the body politic. All right, now this is really demonstrating something here. We're going to put it all together in the end, but it should be pointing out to you that Paul, in very fancy words, is telling these believers in Ephesus that you have been alienated or disconnected from your citizenship to Israel. Mm-hmm. Why? Because without Mashiach. Why? Because you were uncircumcision. Why? Because you were without covenant. Why? You were without Torah. One of the things Torah believers did, they didn't give a care if you were a Hebrew descendant or not. If you lived according to the pagans, they didn't mess with you. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, you see that now. You don't think that's true? You can go into a Christian church. Tell me how many true devout Christians are going to go out to a club and chill. Nope. They're not going to do that. How many true Christians are going to go sit around a bunch of weed smokers and just have a drink with them? They're not going to do that. How many Torah believers in the Messiah are going to sit and have extensive relationships with those who are not in it? The belief of the truth. We're not going to do that because there's a risk involved. And plus, Torah tells you not to because of that risk. Mm-hmm. So even if you were black, white, I don't give a to what nation you were and where you were from and what you looked like, they avoided them. And they were considered covenantless, lawless. That's why they were called uncircumcised. I'm not messing with the uncircumcised. They're not talking about strangers. Why would uncircumcision be an insult to a Greek when uncircumcision didn't matter to a Greek? It mattered to the Hebrew. Mm-hmm. See, that's the significance of understanding the audience, the culture, the times. You can't get that insult. Mm-hmm. It's an insult. Mm-hmm. I'm not dealing with these uncircumcised. Heck no. Mess my day up, mess my week up. Mm-mm. No, I'm not going to do that. So let's continue. If no one has anything else to add.
One comment, please.
No comment?
You mentioned that they were alien from the Commonwealth. I just wanted to highlight that they were alien from Israel's Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm. It says that, the Commonwealth of.
Exactly. Not the world. Israel. So it's telling you again who this is. It's telling you again who it's for. It's telling you again who they are. It's Israel. And you see it in the definition. You see it again highlighted in definitions in the Thayer's definition in your third or fourth, I don't know what bullet it is, but where it says Thayer's definition, a state, theocratic, or a divine commonwealth. This is saying that the person or the people that are alien from Israel's commonwealth do not have YAHUAH as their divine head. He's not their king because the kingdom of Yah is a theocracy. It's not a democracy. It's theocratic. So they were not a part of this common doing, common thinking, common understanding. They weren't a part of it. But now they're being brought into it. Excuse me. I just want to highlight that.
No, and that's right. And that's a very good point to point out. It does not say the citizenship, alienated or separated from the citizenship of the world. They were citizens separated from Israel only. He didn't say Israel and Greece or Rome. No, he didn't say that. So I think that's a good point to really point out. Very good point. All right. Anybody else? We'll move to the next one. Now let's talk about the covenant of promise. So if they were separated from the citizenship of Israel and strangers from the covenant of promise, what is the covenant of promise? Paul says it right here in Galatians 3:15-18, brethren. And boy, that word right there, that is not the same word the church uses. Brethren is literally kinsmen. Literally Hebrew kinsmen. That's what that word means. Not an ambiguous brother out of belief and spiritualness. No. That's kinsmen. I speak after the manner of men, though it be but a man's covenant. Yet, if it be confirmed, no man disannuls or addeth thereto. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. All right? He saith not, and two seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Mashiach. So the covenant, the promise, is telling you that you were alienated to your Messiah that was promised to you. This speaks to the salvation of Israel. This demonstrates and proves who that promise belonged to. It's not to the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, Brother Andrew, I'd like to highlight something here, please. It says here, this is something I was taught when I was in the church. When I was in the church, I was taught that this verse means the following. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not unto seeds as of many, but as of one, unto thy seed, which is Mashiach. So I was told that the promises is made to Mashiach. To Mashiach. Because it says it's not to seeds, which is plural, but one. But this is a failure. That understanding is a failure to dissect this scripture correctly. So let's reread it. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many. So let's stop right there. Right there, we're talking about Abraham and his seed, not the many, because Abraham had, I think, 6 or 7 sons between Keturah, Sarah, and Haggai, right? Only one seed is this promise made to, and that's to Isaac. But as of one seed. And then there is the operative word right here, and. So it's to this one seed of the many seeds that Isaac has, which is Isaac, Jacob, Israel, and to thy seed, which is Mashiach. So it's one seed. You see it? You see it? So the church has taught me that it's to Mashiach. And if it's just to Mashiach, then anyone that comes to Mashiach, this belongs to them too. That is the error that is being taught.
And that's a good point, because this is a very common set of verses that the church uses, saying that the promise is Mashiach. But what you're saying is, and so thus through Mashiach, so whoever believes in Mashiach is a receiver of the promise.
Exactly.
But what you're saying is,
exactly.
He saith not, and two seeds as of many, but as of one, which is Israel, and to thy seed.
That's it.
So it's saying both.
Exactly.
There's two seeds. Israel and the Messiah, who belongs to Israel. That's sweet.
Right?
That is sweet. And that's what it says. I'm not twisting it. That's what it says. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. All right. So let's move to the last slide here for today. Well, we got 2 more slides. I'm sorry. Let's do 2 more slides. So the promise was the seed that came through Abraham, like we said, through the 12 tribes. All right, Israel. The seed also is Yahushua HaMashiach, who brought the promise of salvation to his people, Israel. Now, in time past, Gentiles were not only born of in Ephesus, but lived in sin, making them strangers or foreigners to the promise of this salvation. And that's what Paul was speaking to. That was Paul. And there was no hope for them but until the Messiah came for any of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it wasn't for the Messiah, Paul and Peter's ministries would have never touched the law in Ephesus and all the regions of the colonies of the Greek and Roman colonies. They didn't do it. They would never have went to them. They would have stayed in Judah and all the other regions that in the kingdom areas. They would not have gone out and tried to get their brothers that were lost due to the scattering, the judgments of the previous curses that had impacted them and all that. In fact, if it wasn't for Mashiach, I wouldn't be on this call with you all, with the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was Ephesus. I was the Hebrews in Ephesus.
Mm-hmm.
The same condition, just in a whole other country.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move to the last slide, and we can just restate Ephesians 2:11 and 12. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past a nation without Mashiach, a condition, all right, in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hand. That at that time you were without Mashiach, being shut out of one's fellowship and intimacy from the citizenship of Israel, and without the knowledge of the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without Elohim in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul's audience were Hebrews without Mashiach, which I consider it a condition.
Mm-hmm.
We see this by understanding the original Greek or the Old Greek. Okay? This proves that the letter alone, these two verses prove alone that the letter of Ephesians is to Hebrews born outside of the 12 tribes land. And they were living outside of Torah. They were uncircumcised, so you know they were living outside of Torah. These Hebrews were citizens of a Roman colony that was Hellenistic. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that we've gone through quite a bit. All right? We've gone through quite a bit in Ephesians. I don't think it needs to be any more. I think it's pretty clear that letter does belong to Israel. So we've proven in the last two lessons, part 16 and 17, that two of the biggest letters of Paul are written to Israel, Israelites, Hebrews, just born outside of Israel. The same condition you see a lot of Israel, even a lot of Israelites, and you see that especially in the continent of Africa, and it's been well documented and accepted even by the quote unquote Jewish people. Mm-hmm. That Africa has a lot of real, true Hebrews in it, in the west coast of Africa. So, anybody have anything to add to this?
I actually did. And my thought, this is what I want to say. In your bullet where it says, this proves that the letter of Ephesians is to Hebrews born outside of the 12 tribe lands. I was thinking about that statement because when the Apostle Paul is speaking to the Ephesians, I haven't read anywhere in the Bible where it says that Paul speaks Greek. I haven't read that, right? So this alludes to that Paul is speaking to his brethren. That means family, his family of the 12 tribes. Why would I say that? Because you can have two parents that come out of Nigeria, mother and father, come to America to live and give birth to a child in America. The child will have American citizenship, but the parents will teach that child to speak that language, their language, and the child will learn English too. So the child still knows its language, its native tongue, but he also speaks the language of that land, which is English. So when Paul is speaking to these individuals, they know Hebrew. Their parents are Hebrews. This is why they know Hebrew. He doesn't have to know various languages. He's speaking to them in the native tongue because they are Hebrews of the 12 tribes. And I just wanted to point that out. Excuse me. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
No, you're welcome. I agree with you. That's a good point to make. It's hard to believe that if a Hispanic gentleman wanted to throw a party for his daughter's recent wedding, right? And they throw this party, and the party invites a bunch of family in the community. And where it is in the Mexican community on the south side of Chicago, a very large Hispanic population there. And they all gather up at the venue, and he begins to speak German or Greek. Or let's say he speaks English. Why speak English when his first language is Spanish and the audience speaks Spanish? Why would he suddenly just change it up to make lives hard and inconvenient? Makes no sense.
Right.
Makes no sense. So we're going to end it right here with part 17, I believe. Yeah, part 17.
Yes.
We will continue explaining in part 18 the relevance of Israel as we continue with several other verses just to support what we're talking on. So we thank you all for joining us. We hope that you have learned, even though we do a lot of ad-libbing, it's part of the experience. So please join us in the coming up parts. We got quite a bit more to go through in this lesson that I think you'll really enjoy. Shalom. Thank you so much.
And shalom to those who have gathered with us online, those who are present, and those who will watch our videos in the near future. May YAHUAH barak you and keep you until we connect again on the next Shabbat. Shalom.